Allow me to begin. Alexander Ohnemus, a possibly false white origin theory. My theory, racial Europeans are the result of every other race mixing together under snowy conditions of the Ice Age. Why I think my theory is right. 1. Racial Europeans are more individualistic than every other race. 2. Racial Europeans have bizarre fixations with racial diversity. 3. Racial Europeans have bizarre environmental wellness fixations. 4. Racial Europeans have the most recessive racial genes. 5. Racial Europeans have the biggest visual differences among themselves compared to any other race. 6. Philosophies that require individualism often emerged from racial Europeans. 7. The entire concept of individualism arguably came from racial Europeans. 8. Progressivism and ideology that supports racial diversity and environmentalism was created by racial Europeans. So, if racial Europeans are the result of every other race mixing under extremely snowy conditions, then complete race mixing in another ice age may make the entire human race 100% racially European. Furthermore, the theorized origin of racial Europeans would explain their poor instincts to arrive as a distinct people, because they are not one, and their fixation to lower global warming so they can be higher in numbers. Respectfully, when white north of Mediterranean DNA mixes with non-white DNA, the resulting offspring occasionally appear Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean may be the racial mixing pot of the entire globe. So, white north of the Mediterranean DNA could be just every other DNA mixed, just lightened by snow. So if humans gain control of the weather, then the entire human race maybe could become north of the Mediterranean white. Adding to my point, North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe are not their own continents. Europe is the smaller side of Eurasia, the bigger being Asia. The Middle East is part of Asia, and North Africa is part of Africa. Plus, many have concluded that Native Americans came out of Asia. This could conclude that whites lack their own indigenous continent, yet possess parts of some others. Furthermore, many could argue that many desires that diversity aspires to obtain out of people are already present in the racial European populations. A possibly false white origin theory, the diversity Caucasian thesis. We just completed my first book. We just completed my first one. Now we get to the second one. A possibly false white origin theory, the diversity Caucasian thesis. Alexander Ohnemus, that's me, no school. Author note, first paragraph, complete departmental and institutional affiliation, anthropology with no affiliation, second paragraph, changes in affiliation of any, no affiliation skill, third paragraph, acknowledgments, funding sources, special circumstances, self-owned APA format but citations listed in chronological order of the essay, use, fourth paragraph, contact information, mailing address, and email. OhnemusAlexander@gmail.com, abstract, racial Europeans are the result of every other race mixing in the snowy ice age. That could be a false thesis. The thesis lacks proof, but it might be true because of the following reasons. Europeans are the most individualistic race. Europeans tend to desire racial diversity. Europeans tend to be concerned with the environment. Europeans have the most recessive racial genes. When a racial European and someone of another race reproduce the offspring, then the offspring often appeared more as the other race. Racial Europeans have the biggest visual diversity among themselves compared to any other race. When racial Europeans reproduce with non-whites, the offspring occasionally appear to be other versions of the white race, such as Middle Easterners and North Africans. Further evidence is that whites lack their own geographic continent. Their homelands, North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, are all geographically part of other continents. North Africa is part of Africa, the Middle East is part of Asia, and Europe is the smaller side of Eurasia, the larger being Asia. The dichotomy between the theory of this essay and the Anglo-Israeli thesis could be false because the lost tribes of Israel could have been mixed with everyone else and then mutated to appear what is deemed as the modern-day racial Europeans. Racial Europeans are the most individualistic race. Multiple schools of thought agree on this point. From the far right to the anti-racist, individualism is a part of what anti-racists call white culture. Seattle.gov. The anti-racists believe that being individualistic is part of white privilege. They think individualism is a component of being white, of often white behavior. Some prominent historians also agree that Europeans often display individualism. Wiley.com. Some may attribute that to many different factors. History is complicated, so many factors exist from determining the origins of an outcome. In the field of evolutionary psychology, individualism among racial Europeans is also noted. Peterson, 2017, according to Dr. Kevin B. McDonald, a supposed member of the far right, racial Europeans are often individualistic. McDonald lacked an explanation for the individualism. In conclusion, Europeans are the most individualistic race. Europeans tend to desire racial diversity. Jews originally were Mediterranean, therefore all ethnic Jews are at least part Mediterranean. Taleb, 2016. Jews were Mediterranean in origin, so Northern European Jews are most likely the result of Mediterranean and Northern European DNA. The Mediterraneans are considered white in some circles. Certain DNA tests consider Jews in Europe simply European despite their origins out of Europe ancestry. Computers are less likely to make mistakes than humans. So European Jews are probably generally genetically very close to straight Europeans. With that in mind, the theory of cultural relativism was invented by a European Jew named Franz Boas, study.com. Cultural relativism is definitely related to diversity, as the theory instructs people to value all cultures the same. The theory is similar to moral relativism. The theory would go to pave the way for cultural diversity and therefore other kinds, such as racial. Critical race theory may have been instrumental for the beginning of racial diversity, and the theory originated from Europeans and largely was followed by Europeans. Heredity. The theory states that race is a social construct and not biological. So that is a call for diversity by not valuing racial diversity and believing diversity is positive. So Europeans desire racial diversity. Europeans tend to be very concerned about the environment. Europeans are the most affected by climate anxiety, also known as anxiety of global warming. Ray 2021. Europeans are also afflicted by climate anxiety, that many consider it to be somewhat related to other suspected behavioral trends with them. For example, many ponder the possibility of climate anxiety being white fragility. In conclusion, climate anxiety is largely held by racial Europeans, and this could go on to prove that cold weather helped create racial Europeans. European racial genes are the most recessive. This is self-evident. Racial Europeans have the biggest visual diversity among themselves compared to any other race. This is self-evident. When racial Europeans reproduce with non-whites, the offspring occasionally appear to be other versions of the white race, such as Middle Easterners and North Africans. White people are either indigenous to Europe, Middle East, North Africa, or a combination of only those. Merriam-Webster. This is self-evident. Southwest Asia is the same as the Middle East. Southwest Asia is a larger region than the Middle East, according to some. So the details continue to show. Europe is part of Eurasia. Eurasia is the northern part of it. Eurasia is Europe and Asia. Merriam-Webster. So Europe is not its own continent. Europe and Asia form one continent. That continent is Eurasia. Europe is not its own continent. North Africa is part of the African continent. North Africa is the northernmost part of Africa, Merriam-Webster. North Africa has historically been considered the native land of whites. Indigenous North Africans have been considered whites historically, so whites also lack an entire continent as their homeland. The Middle East is not its own continent. The Middle East is a combination of North Africa and Southwestern Asia, and Merriam-Webster. The Middle East's indigenous population has historically been considered white, and the landmass is not its own continent. The Middle East is another example of the white race lacking its own continent. Therefore, whites lack their own indigenous continent. Many agree that white skin is a product of genetic mutation. Some claim blacks became whites. Many claim blacks became whites. Weiss, 2005. People need certain characteristics to survive in certain environments. Without some characteristics, people are bound to die. However, the exact location of the blacks migrating to Europe is difficult to discover. If one claims possession of hard evidence of a migration, then they may be truthful. Firstly, what is the ancestral makeup of the Middle East? The Middle East has been a very diverse region due to geography and migration ancestry. Middle East encompasses North Africa and Southwestern Asia, according to some credible sources. The Middle East is the non-European part of the Caucasian race. Europe and the Middle East are, under some classifications, the same race. The Middle East could be the result of every other race mixing. Secondly, some claim to have evidence that certain Europeans migrated directly out of the Middle East while in tribal form. Compelling evidence may prove that Caucasian Europeans are descended from ancient Israelites. Benson, 2013. This thesis may have very hard evidence because The Caucasian race includes North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Some consider North Africa to be part of the Middle East. Some also consider that at a certain time, Southern Europe was indistinguishable from the Jews of the Mediterranean. Also, the European Jews of today are considered close enough to the racial Europeans to just be counted as part of Europe. The amount of non-European DNA in the European Jews is considered negligible. Plus, those ancient Israelites maybe had genetic mutations. As the research demonstrates, racial Europeans may be the result of every other race mixing during very cold conditions. Perhaps the essay's available evidence goes as far as Western European DNA itself. The region of Western Europe is very genetically diverse due to much of its history of arrivals, ancestry. So, Western Europe is a result of much race mixing to the extent that its indigenous population is. What makes Western Europe perhaps correctly described by a thesis? The hypothesis of this essay may be confirmed already. The other side of Europe is the East. This side is Eastern Europe. Eastern European DNA counts as European DNA ancestry, like Western European DNA. Eastern European DNA is probably descended from the Middle East as well. Racial Eastern Europeans form part of the Caucasian race as well. Eastern European DNA is part of the Caucasian race. Key words: racial Europeans, Caucasian, race mixing, individualism, diversity, climate change, climate anxiety. References. As for the third book now in the theories, after I show you this table, these references. Alexander Ohnemus, no professor, no particular subject. 24th July 2022. The diverse Caucasian thesis further support. The author's essay definitely has autism, so he is very socially inept. Plus, he shows signs of obsessive compulsive disorder and schizophrenia. Please, that's me, by the way. Please do not take offense to this essay. He is trying to be respectful. This essay was created to follow a possibly false white origin theory diverse Caucasian thesis. This essay further backs the thesis by using possible real-world examples and citing more sources. The thesis was that racial Europeans are the result of every other race illusion mixing during the Ice Age that would explain heavy desires for racial diversity and environmentalism among white populations. Drawing a distinction between indigenous Europeans and whites in general is highly difficult due to terminology. The following screenshots showcase a real-life example of possible evidence of the diversity Caucasian thesis. The DNA test exam belongs to the author of the essay, that's me. Ohnemus 2022. If the largest possible percentage of European DNA were added up, then the author would potentially be over 100% racially European. Here's the equation of the largest possible amount of DNA. European DNA is added to the DNA, and the other DNA is subtracted. 62 minus 28 plus 46 plus 21 plus 17 minus 11 plus 4 minus 3 equals 108. As far as percentages, that's the percentages. I'll go down and show you all this. More ways to calculate ethnicity do exist. The results calculating this essay could mean several conclusions. One is that reality is simulated. Two is that the tested person is a mutant. Another conclusion could be that the subject is specific human evidence of the diverse Caucasian thesis. One should remember sources cited in the previous essay. Western European DNA has significantly more genetic diversity than neighboring regions due to past migrations towards Western Europe ancestry. All the European ancestry of the subject represented by the screenshots is Western European. Eastern European DNA may not match Caucasian diversity, however, Eastern Europeans are still European. If a region is listed as itself at face value, then it probably is according to the list maker. If a region is listed as itself at face value, then it probably is according to the list maker. Eastern European and Western European, Eastern Europe and Western Europe, both are listed as Europe on Ancestry.com. Ancestry. So genetic similarities exist between Eastern and Western Europe. Some may argue that the genetic differences are irrelevant between the two populations. Many commonalities exist between Europe and the Middle East. The Caucasian ethnicity does not have a distinction from some others, and the region Caucasus is a biodiversity hotspot. Ancestry: Middle Eastern, European, and North African are not differentiated from the Caucasian ethnicity genetically, but only regionally. Also, genetically, the Caucasus is currently noted as a biodiversity hotspot. Perhaps that biodiversity is related to the proximity to Europe and the Middle East. That conclusion seems more likely because both Europe and the Middle East are noted for having biological diversity. Similar to Europe and the Caucasus, the Middle East shows a lot of biological diversity. The Middle East was where humans first landed as they headed out of Africa. Ancestry: most biological diversity and ethnicity demonstrates, the less likely that ethnicity is of a distinct people. So, Caucasians are probably not distinct people. That would further explain the DNA test results of the subject. Many have different origin theories about Europeans. Some argue that Europeans are directly descended from ancient Israelis. Benson, 2013. That thesis would be potentially a false dichotomy with the diversity Caucasian thesis, because they both involve the Middle East and European origins. The Middle East plus the Middle East still showcases abundant biological diversity. The Middle East was the first human stop out of Africa. Perhaps the European, Middle Eastern, and Caucasian ethnicity all showcasing biological diversity is more than a coincidence. A biodiversity hotspot is a place of unusually high biodiversity. National Geographic Society, 2022. So Europe is, according to DNA, more biologically diverse than neighboring regions. Regions neighboring Europe are the Middle East and Caucasus. So European DNA may be of the least distinct ethnicity, perhaps further explaining the DNA test results of the subject. Race is an illusion, but whiteness may be a recent and inevitable outcome. European DNA dates back to the Stone Age. Stan, 2013. Race is an illusion. However, European racial characteristics may have been the most recently developed. If one has hard evidence, then that person may have a legitimate opinion depending on the circumstances. The Stone Age would have been a very recent origin. Genetic studies may have determined the previous paragraph's claim. European ethnic DNA is not a distinct people. Curry, 2019. As the second piece of evidence so far, the European ethnicity is not a genetically distinct people. Race is an illusion, everyone knows. Whiteness may be the inevitable outcome of diversity. If whiteness originates from certain events, then it probably will occur again if the same circumstances do again. The universe will freeze its way to destruction. Kaku, 2010. Evidence from the science of physics indicates the universe may freeze its way to destruction. The destructive event is known as the Big Freeze, and whites developed their illusion of race through enough genetic diversity and very low temperatures. So the increasing racial diversity and escalation of low temperatures could result in the human race becoming completely European in both likeness and origin. That is highly unfortunate. What is highly unfortunate with science is the theories can be falsified and never proven true unless it no longer is a theory. A theory by definition is not proven. A big freeze will probably happen. Yoruv, 2008. Theories can be erroneous, theories can be mistaken, so the big freeze may not happen. Whiteness may not be inevitable. The more reliable a source is, the more it should be cited. The most likely way the universe will end will be the big freeze. Koos, 2019. A very recent TED Talk states that the big freeze is the most likely way the universe will end. TED Talks tend to be credible. The big freeze is still just what may happen because it is a theory. Behavioral trends in populations may be related to genetics. Environment evidence suggests determinants of behavior are environments and genetics. Polomian, 1989. A human is created when two other humans reproduce. While race is an illusion, the most common characteristics in a population may exist. A desire for diversity, lower expectations by Europeans, and lower temperatures by Europeans may be the result of, and lower temperature by Europeans may be the result of environment and genetics. Plus, if one is automatically in a diverse environment, that person would probably want more of it. Plus, the weather to allow for more of that person's likeness. Genetics by themselves could be important towards behavior. Genetics by themselves have some evidence to determine that they may influence behavior. Floman, 1991. A theory is not proven. A theory could potentially be proven wrong. So genetics may have nothing to do with behavior. Human behavior may just be a big gamble. If a behavioral trait demonstrates itself again, then it may be very common. According to some polls, environmentalism is often held by whites more extremely than other races. Whittaker, 2005. So according to possibly unreliable polls, whites may be the most concerned with the environment. Polls could always be wrong. Randomness exists in the situation. Randomness exists in the situation. In this situation, if progressivism involves desiring racial diversity, and those who are more extreme progressives focus more on desired diversity. Progressive whites are more extreme on racial issues than progressive non-whites. Pinker, 2019. Progressive whites must really want diversity. They did not see themselves as a collective at all. They have traded all possible collectives for diversity of others. This is at least what Steven Pinker might mean in the tweet. Pinker is an evolutionary psychologist. Sometimes sources with less veracity deserve to be cited as well as to add context. The DNA test subject, an Instagram reel in which me, explains his possibly unusual DNA results in physical characteristics. Ohnemus, 2022. In the video, he explains that under certain settings he has red streaks in what is otherwise black hair. His eyes appear to be greenish light brown. Some claim that non-mixed Europeans have to have lighter than black hair and dark brown eyes. That video may be the least credible source of the essay. The author believes he could pass as 100% racially European. I could pass as 100% racially European, couldn't I? Could I? I think I could. The vast majority would seem to agree that Europeans have embraced egalitarian individualism to a large extent, or at least have largely abandoned identity politics for themselves. The alt-right may want Europeans to embrace identity politics again, but they recognize that a massive abandonment of that has occurred. McDonald, 2019. Europeans have, by and large, abandoned identity politics. They have adopted colorblind politics, or ones that value diversity. Diversity may mean less Europeans, so some Europeans have embraced the exact opposite of what would be their racial interests. When closely examined, one can gain valuable insight from politics from majority racial European countries. The left cares about fairness and the right cares about virtue, both disregarding European identity politics. Height, 2012. To further analyze the situation, the left wants to promote identity politics of every race besides Europeans, and the right dismisses identity politics altogether. Collectivism may be fine for every race besides Europeans. The thesis of this essay may be proven already. To further the point, conservatives do not focus on diversity but are laissez-faire when it comes to racial identity. So they may instinctively know the big freeze. The research demonstrates that a good chance exists that Europeans evolved from every other race during low enough temperatures for whiteness to develop. The diversity Caucasian thesis is backed by hard evidence, real-life examples, and more citations have been added to further support the thesis. On another ending note, the universe ending due to disappearing heat seems intuitive because it began due to heat. If some place exists due to a substance, then the end of that substance could be the reason for the end of that place. You see, here are the citations. I'll put this in the description. The Diversity Caucasian Thesis, third essay. Alexander Ohnemus, professor of physics, subject July 31st, 2022. The Diversity Caucasian Thesis, third essay. The author of this essay tries to be respectful as possible. He definitely has autism. That's me. I have autism. So he is very socially inept. He also shows signs of schizophrenia, very delusional at times, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. OCD, very repetitive at times. This essay composes a book that follows the Diversity Caucasian Thesis further support a possibly false white origin theory, book 2. This book would tackle why East Asians are not directly the same origin as whites or Asian Europeans, despite common lighter skin also raises an illusion yet all humanity could eventually mutate into whiteness. Lighter skin may be a commonality between some Europeans and some Asians. Hard scientific evidence has determined the lighter skin commonality between Europeans and some Asians is due to mutations. Weiss, 2005. So, the lighter skin shared between some Europeans and some Asians is due to mutations. Previously, both groups had been blacks. In accordance with the last book, the mutation could be inevitable with the upcoming Big Freeze, plus the rising racial illusion diversity. The East Asian ethnicity starkly contrasts with the Europeans. East Asian ethnicity is more distinct than the European ethnicity due to more isolation, ancestry. So East Europeans have less biological diversity than Europeans, perhaps only Western Europeans. In spite of the matching mutation, the two ethnicities are not one and the same. East Asians have a different history. Unfortunately, a theory is not proven but can be debunked. According to evidence from physics, the universe is most likely to end in a big freeze. Coos, 2019. The ending seems very intuitive because if the universe began due to heat and is fueled by heat, then the end of that would logically be the end. The end of heat would logically be the end of the universe. If fuel and the source of a place ends, if the fuel and source of a place ends, then the location itself would probably also end. If the big freeze did occur, then humans would probably mutate. Mutations can be the means of survival and therefore positive. Emerson, 2021. Having analyzed the first citation of the essay, humans could potentially all adapt to the specific illusion of race as whiteness due to the big freeze. And that mutation coupled by that illusion could be the means of survival. So whiteness could be the inevitable end, the inevitable result of all of humanity. Race is an illusion and therefore the product of mutation in society. Mutations can be rapid or occur more slowly. In Ziluri 2021, therefore, individuals could mutate at different speeds. Race is definitely an illusion, but individuals can mutate into whiteness. Maybe the entire human race will mutate into whiteness because of the big freeze. Evidence is important for theories. Empirical evidence is based on experience, Merriam-Webster. Boiling things down to the most fundamental truth is a better way of supporting theories. Evidence can be misleading. Unfortunately, the theory is not proven. Evidence is not proof. No theory is proven. By definition, a theory is not proven. A fact is proven, not a theory. Citations. I'll put these in the description. I'm trying to adapt a book. Trying to adapt a series of books. Alexander Ohnemus, no professor, no subject, August 7, 2022. The Diversity Caucasian Thesis, 4th essay. The social ineptness of the author must be noted due to neurology. The author, he is socially very inept. I mean myself. The book I referred to myself. He has a neurological condition of autism. The essay is meant to explain how whiteness may be inevitable for all humanity, more specifically why humans are bound to resemble the European variation, the illusion of race, and not the Asian variation. This 4th essay and the book in the series, A Possibly False White Origin Theory. Theories cannot be confirmed. If a theory is confirmed, it is no longer a theory, but a fact. The origins of Europeans are still debated. Some estimate they originate out of East Asians. Tateno 2014. This theory contrasts with other theories about genetic European origins. Previously, essays in the series have theorized that Europeans genetically originate from every other race of the racial illusion, from every other variation of the racial illusion reproducing during the Ice Age. Many with harder evidence would disagree that Europeans are solely derived from East Asians. People who do DNA tests to stay in business would disagree that Europeans are solely derived from East Asians. Western European illusion of race DNA is the product of many migrations and therefore very genetically diverse ancestry. By that logic, Western Europe may lack indigenous population, but may be the product of migrations into genetic mutations. The European part of the illusion of race may be the result of genetic diversity and genetic mutations, as evidence continues to demonstrate. Evidence continues to back the thesis. Skin color is determined by many factors, including but not limited to the environment. The closer to the equator a population has remained, the darker its skin is. National Geographic. A population is a group of people, a race is an illusion, so all humans are all the same in origin. Yet once human population separated, they moved to respective locations relative to the equator. That is the origin of characteristics of the illusion of race. Europe is farther from the equator than Asia, thus explaining the differing characteristics between the two populations. If all humans have the same origins, then mutations could explain physical differences. Blacks, the original humans, mutated into whites and Asians. Weiss, 2005. The farther a group moves from the equator, the lighter it becomes. That would explain why the European illusion of race population are lighter skinned than the East Asian illusion of race populations. The East Asian illusion of race populations remain closer to the equator. Both East Asian illusion of race and European illusion of race, as well as every other human population, were originally black. Perhaps the underlying genetic diversity is unnecessary for creating the European variation of the illusion of race. Eastern European and Western European are the same variation of the race illusion, yet the former is less genetically diverse than the latter. Ancestry. So the distance from the equator may be the cause of whiteness. Some argue humans can never know the truth of a matter. However, environmental factors may determine how the illusion of race manifests. Mutations vary. A mutation can vary in both its what and when, its place of development and specific function. National Geographic 2022. Potentially, with enough of an environmental change through acquired mutations, all of humanity could adapt to the European variation of the illusion of race. That becomes more and more likely as the Big Freeze is more likely the end of the universe. If the universe runs out of heat, then the end of heat could be the end of the universe. When the fuel of an entity ends, that could be the end of the entity. The periodic table is the institutionally recognized list of elements. Hydrogen is the first element in the periodic table, NCBI. Hydrogen is an element according to institutions. Hydrogen is an element. Hydrogen also is the first element listed. The periodic table recognizes hydrogen as a distinct element. If the elements make up the entire universe, then the most common element listed first in the periodic table may be the fuel of the universe. Hydrogen is the most common element in the universe and the first on the periodic table, NCBI. Elements most likely compose the entire universe since they are naturally distinct substances that were discovered and not created. The more of a substance exists inside of an entity, the more important it may be. If all of or enough of hydrogen takes a certain action, then the effect could destroy or massively change the universe. Heat is a recognized phenomenon by physicists. Heat is the transfer of energy from one body to another due to changing temperature. Britannica 2021. So if heat no longer existed, then the universe would no longer exist. Energy transferring is what fuels the universe. The process would probably be slow and the climates would change. Individuals would acquire mutations to become the European variation of the illusion of race during their lifetimes. All of humanity may develop to whiteness. A big freeze has not determined the end of the universe as a fact, but only a theory. A recent TED speaker believes the big freeze will end the universe. Cost 2019. If a credible source like TED speakers believes the universe will end a certain way, then they may have the best evidence and most likely theories. A universe is still not known for sure. The big freeze may be the end of the universe. The source is not always credible just because the author has credentials pertaining to the subject matter. Stars, including the sun, are mostly fueled by hydrogen. Cool cosmos. If the sun is a star, then stars are the fuel of the universe. Heat is the transfer of the star's energy to the rest of the universe. Without heat, all of existence would end. If the big freeze has some function stopping hydrogen energy, then that could be very deadly. Climates could potentially become cooler, causing people to develop the European variation of the illusion of race. Theories can be debunked, and a source's credibility is not always guaranteed by the subject. Specific credentials its author possesses. The big freeze will end the universe because of the second law of thermodynamics, Kako 2010. A theory seems more likely when more experts in the specific field agree on it, but growing agreement on the experts in the specific field does not necessarily mean the theory is more likely. The expert agreement could be fueled by many factors. The big freezing of the universe seems more likely for expert agreement. Kaku reasoned the stars losing energy will contribute to the universe's end and the increase of coldness. Unfortunately, the universe ending by the heat death is only a theory, despite how logical it may be. No one is aware of how the universe will end. However, in the very unlikely end of the heat death, in the very likely event of the heat death, all of humanity could be mutated to become the European variation of the illusion of rays. All of the predictions in this essay may be logical, however, to arrive at the truth, many computers may be necessary. A single person may not be able to figure out if these predictions will happen or not, and even with the computer help, errors may still occur. The Caucasian diversity thesis is still a collection of theories. A new subject matter may need to be developed, perhaps known as anthropological chemical physics, to cover this series of essays. Works cited. Here I have the works cited. Alexander Ohnemus, no professor, no subject, like I say. Diversity Caucasian thesis, 5th essay. The disability of the author should be acknowledged in case anyone is offended by the essay. That's me, I have a disability. At 100 signatures, this petition is more likely to be featured recommendation. And I quote, at 100 days, the signature is more likely to be featured recommendations. At 100 signatures, this petition is more likely to be featured recommendations. Alexander Ohnemus started this petition to Governor Gavin Newsom, special academic and vocational services. While I am not mentally stable enough to complete usual academic requirements to become a professional researcher, I do have the reading, writing, and critical thinking skills as showcased in this series of books I self-published. I have the research abilities. I, however, struggle with human contact. I often feel bouts of pain when no longer socially isolated. I also feel great anxiety when around other people. Cancer runs in my family, so I'm more likely to get cancer when around others. I also am highly socially inept, so I may violate social codes without realizing it until too late. Sometimes inappropriate statements escape my mouth before I realize it. Sometimes I commit inappropriate acts without realizing it. So I could get a certificate to research and then automatically get a job to do so. So could I get a certificate to research and then automatically get a job to do so? I also struggle to leave my bedroom without feeling great pain, so I struggle with proper hygiene too. I believe the behaviors are because I'm autistic. Ohnemus 2022, and I quote Ohnemus 2022. The author, me, is socially inept for neurological reasons, so he may offend you without realizing it. This essay is the 5th book of the A Possibly Falsified Origin Theory series. This essay will predict if each human is equally as likely to mutate in the same environment. The answer will help predict the inevitability of every human individual, eventually developing the European variation of the racial illusion. The essay will then further contrast the behavior and genetics of Western and Eastern Europeans. To explain why Western Europeans who invented eugenics and were the most serious about race-based immigration restrictions now have extreme desires to hinder their own group interests or extreme laissez-faire attitudes towards racial illusion identity. As many citations in this essay will indicate, race is not biological. Racial diversity is not a significant part of human variation because race is not biological. Arrivanda 2015. Although racial diversity may lead to some benefits, it is not a significant cause of human variation. Race is an illusion because racial genes do not exist. Many further citations will demonstrate the same conclusion. Projects have demonstrated more of the human genome. The human genome is a commonality across all racial illusion variations of humanity. Human Genome Project results approximately 2003. If such commonalities exist across all of humanity, the importance of the racial illusion diminishes. Humans are one race. Commonalities demonstrate the unity of humanity. Race continues to be demonstrated as not a significant genetic division of humanity. Despite varying physical appearances, humans are not genetically divided by racial classification. Siri and Pablo. Race is not biological. Many of the physical differences among humans are due to environmental factors. Races are several genetic clusters of other traits. Perhaps more citations back the thesis. Another environmental source determines the race significant factor in human variation. Understanding Human Genetic Variation 2007. Humans may have different traits among themselves, but no genes are exactly racial. Genes are not racial. Differing appearances are due to environmental factors. A long-standing genetic division had been debunked after recent discoveries. All humans, including Africans and Neanderthal DNA. Wolf 2020. So humans, Africans and non-Africans both are partially descended from Neanderthals. The entire human race is part of Neanderthal. Africa previously believed genetic division. Another previously believed genetic division among humanity has been debunked. Ethnocentrism can be attributed to different genes. Europeans as a group are relatively less ethnocentric according to genetic studies. Dutton 2016. According to anthropological evidence, Europeans are not ethnocentric. The bridge between hard and soft evidence can be difficult to discern. Many argue that philosophy is an art to deal with what humans do not know, while science is what humans do with knowledge. Europeans showcase low ethnocentrism compared to other groups. Explanations are discovered through further research. Due to the biological diversity of Western European illusion of race DNA, they are less distinct of a people ancestry. If genes determine behavior, then the relatively low ethnocentrism of the illusion of race European population could be explained by their less distinct DNA. The more biological diversity of DNA, the less distinct ethnicity is. Many argue that behavior can be attributed to DNA. Many ethnicities belong to Europe, and more overlap exists between Europeans and Middle Easterners with their respective illusions of race. European Jews count as their own ethnicity ancestry. European Jews originate from the Levant and are now considered to exist from Russia and northern Spain despite unclear geography. European Jews are considered part of the European variation of the illusion of race by some. Others consider Jews to be the Middle Eastern variation of race inhabiting Europe. Jews are considered European by some. Perhaps the suspected lack of European ethnocentrism only exists among the Western part of the for certain reasons. Eastern Europe illusion of race DNA is not as biologically diverse as its Western Canada ancestry. Eastern Europe also takes less immigrants than Western Europe, perhaps due to the DNA differences. Perhaps the theory is true that the less distinct an ethnicity is, the less likely it will be ethnocentric. Studies can only explain so much. Governmental websites may be more likely to be honest. In quote, public opinion towards immigrants is rather negative in Central and Eastern Europe. End of quote. European Commission 2020. Currently, Central and Eastern Europeans prefer less immigrants than Western Europeans. Explanations could be formed. Many explanations could be reached. The United Nations is an organization that carries out statistics about its members. Western Europe has more immigrants than Eastern Europe, UN. That could be for many reasons. The behavioral genetics of recent ethnic Europeans could play a role. Perhaps ethnocentrism is determined by lack of biological diversity in the group's DNA. Ancestry may not be very clear on what ethnicity is what. Finnish and Russian ethnicity forms one of its own ancestry. A company that does DNA tests must have access to labs. Finland is part of Scandinavia. Russian is part of Eastern Europe. According to people who professionally do DNA tests, the supposed recent indigenous people of the two regions constitute one ethnic group. Perhaps the overlap between recent European and recent North African DNA is more present in some areas than others. The Iberian Peninsula shows genetic overlap as far as population with North African ancestry. Previous essays in this series of books have also noted the recent genetic similarities between Europeans, Middle Easterners, and North Africans. The timing of migrations may be important to the discoveries of DNA tests. The Iberian Peninsula is part of Western Europe, so the overlap with southern regions may not be recently detected for other parts of Western Europe. The recent Irish ethnicity may be distinct from the rest of Western Europe. The recent Irish ethnicity has its spot on Ancestry.com. Has its own spot. The recent answer has its own spot on Ancestry.com. Ancestry. The recent Irish have their own ethnicity apart from the rest of the Western Europe. Due to what could be genetic differences, some solutions may be difficult to find without another direct study. In conclusion, apparently the recent Irish ethnicity is distinct from the rest of the recent Western European ethnicity. Apparently other pairs of regions form a common ethnicity. Recent Greek and Italian ethnicities are the same ancestry. Both Greece and Italy are part of Western Europe. Apparently they are a pair that are the same ethnicity. Greek and Italian and their recent ethnic forms could be distinct from the rest of Western Europe. Perhaps ethnicities are not hard lines and are just thin clouds dividing the human populations. The recent Middle East ethnicity overlaps with the recent European ethnicity ancestry. Perhaps the recent Middle Eastern and recent Western European ethnicity overlap. Maybe the recent Middle East shares less of an overlap with recent Eastern Europe ethnicity. The Middle East was the first stop as they arrived out of Africa, as humans arrived out of Africa. As humans arrived at Africa. North Africa has its own region. North Africa is its own ethnicity ancestry. North Africa is considered part of the Middle East by some. By others, North Africa is considered not part of the Middle East. The Middle East is considered by some to be part of Asia and Africa. The Caucasus is a region composed of other Middle Eastern and Eastern European ethnicities. Caucasus is a biodiversity hotspot partially due to the multiple ethnicities that inhabit the region ancestry. Perhaps in this series the region has been discussed. Perhaps recent Caucasians have so many distinct groups that are part of them. The amount of groups may also make them less distinct. Central Asia is a region. The recent Central Asians are their own ethnicity ancestry. Central Asia is part of Asia. If a region has Asia in its name, then it is part of Asia. Central Asia is the center of Asia, and its recent ethnicity may be considered white by some. Scholars may agree that behavior shapes genetics. A recent study thinks human behavior can be determined by genetics. Lochlin, 1988. Less genetically distinct ethnicities being less ethnocentric seems intuitive. That could explain Western European behavior towards the diversity. Western Europeans also can create speech codes that punish themselves for offending others. Some physical human characteristics may be due to mutations. And I quote, racial differences in MLHI and MSH2 mutation analysis of yellow race and white race based on Insight database. End of quote. We 2010. A database exists to explain the illusion of race. The illusion of race may be due to mutations. Humans mutated into their respective illusions of race. This source has been cited in previous essays in the series, but is a great reminder deserving new analysis. In quote, How Blacks Became Whites, end of quote, Wise 2005. This quote has determined the mutation is responsible for blacks becoming whites and Asians. This source is from a .edu website, so it is probably credible, a clear piece of research backing the essay. A theory seems to be more true when more credible sources support it. And in quote, How a genetic mutation led to the white race, end of quote, Nadra 2020. Recent credible sources believe that whites are the result of mutations. Race is an illusion, race is an illusion, and the white variation of it is due to mutations as respectfully as possible. When an intellectual has a reputation for citing facts, that thinker is more likely to be credible. The progressive movement has decided to go from seeking racial purity of Western Europeans to encouraging diversity at all costs. Seoul, 2013. Seoul has spotted a great change in the progressive movement. Seoul has noted that change has not noted the reason behind it. Seoul has yet to identify the reasoning. An intellectual is probably serious in a book if that thinker expresses the same opinion in an interview. Progressives have gone from desiring racial purity to racial diversity. Seoul, 2013. Seoul is most likely serious about his opinion. Why would an intellectual repeat the same unserious opinion twice? Seoul still has not identified the underlying motives of progressives desiring diversity. Government articles are regarded as credible sources of essays. In quote, eugenetics played such an important from progressive reform seekers. Eugenetics gained much support from progressive reform thinkers who sought to plan social development using expert knowledge in both social and natural science and genetics. Progressive reformers saw the opportunity to attack social problems efficiently by treating the cause bad heredity rather than the effect. End of quote. Allen, 1989. Progressive reformers were the leaders of the progressives. They were the intellectuals that Seoul was referring to previously in this essay. Government articles confirm Seoul's claims about progressive support of eugenetics. Government articles can give historical details as well, such as the Immigration Act of 1924. In quote, the justification for the laws was rooted in theories of eugenics and racism. Prescott Hall, the co-founder of the Immigration Restriction League, which came to the idea of where the law posed a question for the American people, in quote, do we want this country to be peopled by British, German, and Scandinavian stock, or by Slav, Latin, and Asiatic races, historically downtrodden, atavistic, and stagnant, end of quote. Nos fraye, end of both quotes. Nos rade. Progressives must have changed dramatically. Modern-day progressives put an extreme focus on diversity. Progressives in the modern day claim racial diversity is one of the most important factors the United States of America could get. What could have changed the mindset of white progressives so quickly? They went from being the leaders of their group interests to the complete opposite. Whatever the cause, that change is very significant at face value. The white progressives have been a metaphorical 180 regarding their group interests. An emphasis exists among recent genetic Europeans for the anti-racist agenda. Special importance exists for regulating the behavior of recent genetic Europeans. Hangerman, 2016. Anti-racists may want to regulate the behavior of recent genetic Europeans. This can be demonstrated by caring about their parenting. Why is that the case? More claims have been made regarding the progressives. Some legal experts believe progressives seek an unreachable goal of racial equality. Bell, 2008. This essay will not make value judgments. The point of this essay is to understand human behavior. Why is switch from racial purity genetics to diverse among progressives? To the when and what of movements change in opinion may be easier to identify in the motivation. In quote, third, the one place where a sharp difference emerged between progressives and their various opponents was in the subsequent rejection of genetic racism in favor of a more environmentalist nurture-based models of human nature and development. More environmentalist views began to take hold of the social scientists in the 1910s and 1920s and began to change legal thinking in the 1940s. They found expression in the Supreme Court that was most unanimously Democrat and self-acknowledged progressive. The result was gradual emergence of a division that was endured to the day, with progressives largely appearing as promoters of racial inclusion and diversity. End of quote. Hoover Camp, 2017. Larger quotations require more analysis to demonstrate how they support the thesis. Eventually an event occurred that changed the past exclusionary progressive movement into the modern day one. Progressives began to demonstrate more concern for the environment than other movements. The environment affects an entire population. The nature-based and environmentalistic views replace those of previous genetic racism. Additional reasons could be the pattern that less distinctive an ethnicity groups DNA, less ethnocentric that ethnicity will be. Western Europeans comprise both the modern day and past progressives by a large amount. Perhaps they've discovered environmentalism may breed more of them. Even those deemed prosecutors of European racial interests may not know what white is. Hi, Mr. And I quote, hi, Mr. Ohnemus. We do not have an editorial/official policy on what is white and who isn't. On who is white and who isn't. For me, anyone who is 75% white is white. Take care. End of quote. Chris, Roberts, 22. American Renaissance company that considers itself the defender of white racial interests lacks an editorial and or official definition of who is white and who is not. Yet they think whites are distinct people given their percentage. That could mean several explanations. Maybe they agree that environmental changes will cause people to become white. American Renaissance is definitely a real website. American Renaissance exists to advocate for the rights of ethnic Europeans. American Renaissance. The American Renaissance is in existence. The website is not fictitious. The website is linked to the citation of this essay. Other sources also acknowledge the American Renaissance existence. American Renaissance is a website that advocates for white people. Southern Poverty Law Center. Another website has confirmed the existence of American Renaissance is another website that has confirmed the existence of American Renaissance as a fellow site. The Southern Poverty Law Center disagrees with American Renaissance. Our opposition can acknowledge its opponents. How geographically close were Neanderthals to modern humans? Neanderthals were also humans. Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. So Neanderthals and modern humans were the same species. This could explain how they managed to reproduce together. Other studies demonstrate that human skull shape is determined by Neanderthal DNA. In quote, Neanderthal-derived genetic variation shaped modern humans' cranium and brain. In quote, Gregory, 2017. A team of authors with reputations for scientific knowledge have determined that the Neanderthal influence of human DNA shapes the brain of modern-day humans. A theory is not proven. Once a theory is proven, it becomes a fact. A difference exists between pseudoscience and real science. Could the paper be pseudoscientific? More research would be necessary to determine the credibility of the research. Any theory is not proven. Once a theory is proven, it becomes a fact. To further determine the veracity of the theories, let's just say a computer will probably be necessary. A laboratory may also be necessary. 3 facts have been determined to identify racial illusionary classification. Apologies because the facts may overlap. 1. Physical appearance, phenotype. 2. Genetic population membership, how long individuals' cell ancestors have been part of a population. This determines the DNA one has in common with the rest of a group. 3. Percentage of Neanderthal DNA. This determines skull shape. Having determined those 3 factors, a human could potentially change from one racial illusionary classification to another by mutating. 1. Physical appearance can be changed through acquired mutations. 2. Perhaps a new population could be established by mutants. Their common DNA could be mutations. 3. If Neanderthals and modern humans are close enough genetically, then a mutation could potentially turn modern human DNA to Neanderthal DNA. We're excited. My last book, this is where the Whiteness Project. I propose a project to test my theories. The Whiteness Project, 8/13/2022. Alexander Ohnemus, No Company, 937 North Camden Drive, Elk Grove, zip code 95640. Review. Physics may be the best way to support or falsify a theory. The way is to boil down to the most fundamental, then reason up. The theories in my book series will be tested. Maybe some of the theories deserve more testing than others. Goals. Obtain a computer. 2. Use a computer to test the theories. Specifications. I will need to persuade enough people to work on the project with me. This project may be so complex that not one person can complete alone. I will lead the project with extreme yet reasonable pessimism. I know that any move I make will be more likely to have a negative outcome than a positive. Whenever my will to reach the goal is so great that I will act in spite of my rational fear. I will also use critical thinking milestones to persuade the team into working on a project, get the equipment, complete the project. My project is to see how long it will take for genetic mutation to turn someone's racial characteristics, such as from not white to white. I will add one book to the end of this. I will add a book, Western European Value Systems. I will add this. I'm going to read one more book for the sake of this. I'm going to add a book for that. Alexander Ohnemus, Professor, Disciplinary, 16th of August, 2022. Western European Value Systems. Ethnocentrism practically does not exist among the Western European ethnicity. Altruism and individualism do exist among the ethnicity. The roots of liberal altruism and conservative individualism perhaps developed from the Western European ethnicity. Those conjectures can be observed and their causes may be located. On a side note, the author of this essay is socially inept due to reasons beyond his own control. He's autistic. By that I mean me. I'm the author. Therefore, it would be appreciated if no one took offense to this essay. The science, genetics may explain the Western European value system. Maybe due to the Western European ethnicity's genetic makeup, they have low ethnocentrism. That's in 2016. A theory is not proven. As soon as a theory becomes proven, it becomes a fact. Scientific rigor of analysis could increase if the genes were more specifically identified. More research can be performed when more evidence is available. And I quote, in quote, we conducted a review of factors associated with individuals, group-level differences in positive ethnocentrism, PE, and negative ethnocentrism, NE. We intercorrelated data sets on natural differences in these factors with data from the World Value Survey with regard to natural differences in measures of PE and NE. The 2 different survey items for each construct were strongly correlated, but the constructs themselves were not significantly associated. Multiple regression analysis indicated that NE was mainly related to high levels of cousin marriage and frequency of the DRD24 repeat gene, and that P is mainly related to young median population age. Cousin marriage may indicate low levels of trust. DR24 implies a fast life history strategy, and young median age associated with many factors they can be. Scientific studies may not always be good ways to arrive at a true scientificity can come in many forms. Some scientific studies examine empirical evidence. Empirical evidence is based on experience. Others use physics, which is boiling the investigation down to the fundamentals and reasoning up. A survey may not always be the best way to gather data. Different types of surveys can have different levels of credibility. Just because two constructs have a significant correlation does not mean they are the same. Two constructs can have a significant correlation and be very different. Just because multiple studies have the same result does not mean the conclusion is true. The rigor of the kind of study is potentially a greater indicator of credibility than multiple studies agreeing. Many argue that some truths are difficult for any human to find. Human DNA has many discoveries to find. Attitudes can replace ethnocentrism. In quote, the effect of ethnocentrism in the promotion of incentive fitness has been shown in computer simulations demonstrating that ethnocentric groups are always eventually trying to create groups of individualists or altruists, e.g. Harrison, Carver, and Schwartz, 2013, end of quote, Dutton, 2016. Two attitudes that can replace ethnocentrism are altruism and individualism. Altruism is selflessness, individualism is selfishness. People can argue and make judgments about the importance of selfishness. People can argue and make value judgments about the importance of selfishness and selflessness. To identify the veracity of evidence study, the definition of regression analysis is necessary. In quote, regression analysis involves identifying the relationship between a dependent variable and one or more independent variables. End of quote, Britannica. That is the definition of regression analysis. Britannica is a credible encyclopedia. The data may be accurate. To further assess the veracity of Dutton's study, the definition of DRD4 is necessary. In quote, the dopamine receptor D4 gene, DR24, 7 repeat allele has been found to interact with environmental factors such as parenting in children and pure attitudes in adults to influence aspects of behavior such as risk-taking, end of quote. She's 2012. Less risk-taking could mean less trusting people. To trust people is a risk. Trust is a pure attitude. Risk-taking is a pure attitude if it is trust. Genetics may explain behaviors according to some scientists they do. In quote, even personal aspects of individuals such as spirituality and political ideology are affected to an extent by genes, end of quote, Baker, 2015. Perhaps the political reflections of Western Europeans lacking ethnocentrism is genetics. Ethno-nationalism is rare among Western Europeans. Any part of the Western European value system rarely or never possesses ethnocentrism. Instead, the Western European value system has individualism or altruism. Perhaps more recently and less distinctly established ethnicities. Perhaps more recently and less distinctly established ethnicities are less ethnocentric. In quote, due to its isolation geography, Western Europe has seen many successive waves of immigrants throughout its history. Both peaceful intermingling and violent invasions of newcomers have resulted in a greater diversity in the genetics of the population compared with neighboring regions. End of quote, History.com. Logically, Western Europe was bound to host many immigrants. Some note Western Europe as a region of immigrants. The immigrants have made the Western European ethnicity more genetically diverse than neighboring populations. Ancestry.com does not define neighboring. Neighboring could mean every other ethnicity. The ethnic Western European population is less distinct than other ethnicities. DRD4 repeat gene is a repeat gene. And I quote, in quote, a tandem repeat is a sequence of 2 or more DNA bases that is repeated numerous times in a head-to-tail manner on a chromosome. Tandem repeats are generally present in non-coding DNA. In some cases, tandem repeats can serve as genetic markers to track inheritance in families. They can be useful for DNA fingerprinting in forensic studies. End of quote. Kindroth, 2022. A repeat gene is a gene that is repeated. A tandem repeat denotes any repeat genes. Tandem repeats are generally present in a certain kind of DNA. Non-coding DNA is a certain kind. In some cases, repeat genes can track inheriting genes in families. Perhaps the more inbred a family is, the more repeat genes it will have. If repeat genes can be noted for individuals as well, they are more likely identified. Identifying individuals is necessary for forensic studies. Less distinct, more diverse, and more recently established ethnicities may have less repeat genes. Even far-fetched conjectures may deserve analysis. U.S. liberals, U.S. conservatives, and U.S. libertarians all prefer their abstract ideas than identity politics. Height 2012. Possibly because the United States of America is predominantly Western European or made up of and established by that ethnicity's culture, identity politics have been non-existent. The country has preferred abstract ideas to identity politics. Also, conservatives value individualism while liberals value altruism. Libertarians may value individualism more than conservatives. Western European ethnic identity politics have especially been out of the political climate. Liberals could call for more racial diversity or progress. Conservative libertarians would value diversity in relation to their abstract ideas. All of these value systems would call for drastic measures to existential threats. Potentially, technology to change the weather could sprout out of more free market economies. Potentially, it could sprout out of less free market economies. Very mixed economies could also produce solutions. Potentially, all political persuasions could work to stop the existential threat of climate change. Climate change could mean any change in climate. A better term is global warming because existential threat involves the heating of the Earth. To further understand Western European value systems, an understanding of global warming may be necessary. In quote, human activity affects global surface temperatures by changing the Earth's radioactive balance. The, in quote, give and take, end of quote, between that comes in during the day and what Earth comes during the day and what the Earth emits at night. Increases in greenhouse gases, i.e. trace gases such as carbon dioxide and methane that absorb heat energy emitted from the Earth's surface and radiate it back, generated by industry and transportation, cause the atmosphere to retain more heat, which increases temperatures and alters precipitation patterns. End of quote. Britannica 2022. A credible encyclopedia explains why human activity can cause global warming, or why human activity can cause the Earth's rise in temperature. The usage of certain gases causes more heat to exist or stay in the atmosphere. Already existing heat is absorbed, then radiated back. More heat either stays in the atmosphere or the already existing heat stays for a longer time. To further explore Western European value systems, knowing the negative impact of global warming may be important. In quote, continued global warming is expected to impact everything from energy use to water availability or to crop productivity throughout the world. Poor countries and communities with limited abilities to adapt to these changes are expected to suffer disproportionately. Global warming is already being associated with increases in the incidence of severe and extreme weather, heavy flooding and wildfires, phenomena that threaten home, dams, and transportation networks and other facets of human infrastructure. Learn about the IPCC's Sixth Amendment report released in 2021. The 2021 describes the social impacts of global warming. End of quote. Britannica 2022. Global warming is an existential threat because it potentially threatens the existence of many life forms. Energy is an existential threat for human existence. Energy use is essential for human existence. Water is an essential human existence. Crop availability is also an essential human existence. To adapt to a change, one would need resources. To adapt to change, a body of people would need resources. Countries without the necessary resources to adapt to global warming are at a greater risk than those with more resources. If data on human infrastructure being damaged by global warming is available, then global warming is a documented existential threat. Even if the data only shows an association between global warming and destruction of human necessities, the risk could be so great that not taking action could contribute to an existential threat. If institutions back a course of action, that sociological framework indicates the action is being taken seriously. An institution has the extra authority on allocation of resources. An institution also is sociologically the preserver of something deemed important by a society. the Western European value system is continuing to determine the morality based on preservation of the important. Sociology has led climate change to be held as institutional priority. In quote, the Working Group 1 contribution to the 6th assessment report addresses the most up-to-date physical understanding of the climate system and climate change, bringing together the latest advances in climate science. End of quote. IPCC.ch 2022. End of quote. No, end of quote already ended. IPCC.ch IPCC.ch 2022. The institution referenced by Britannica as determining global warming to be a threat worthy of surveillance. If Britannica is a credible encyclopedia, then the institutions it cites as evidence are probably also credible. The veracity of the sources is high enough for this essay to deem the evidence as hard. The guiding forces of Western European value systems are further put on display. What institutions name themselves can determine their purpose. And I quote, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and I quote, is the name of the organization Rebecca cited. If an encyclopedia is credible and the veracity is already high. If the encyclopedia cites institutions deemed as high, then the veracity is even higher as well as maintained. Either climate change is a threat deserving of surveillance that makes up many resources, or the sociological framework implies that to an essay writer. Just because a sociological framework has chosen certain authority does not mean this authority is correct on issues. The ongoing political debate may not concern the seriousness of global warming. In quote, although prior research has identified communication strategies for reducing climate change skepticism, recent research suggests such approaches can backfire. To explore this issue, we need on a preliminary study investigating two prominent messaging styles, the consensus and targeting messages. While consensus messaging did not produce significant effects, targeting messages emphasize free market solutions to climate change were effective at improving conservatives' climate change acceptance. Furthermore, the inclusion of consensus information did not improve or diminish the effects of the targeting messages. These findings underscore the utility of targeting messaging in improving the climate change acceptance among political conservatives. End of quote. Dixon, 2017. The cited study focused on research backfiring, but that is not all it is focused on. The ongoing debate could concern the methods of dealing with global warming. According to the article, if the values of conservatives were considered when persuading them to accept climate change, acceptance of the scientific consensus would increase. If someone has a value system, then they may ignore existential threats if the beliefs in such action for the sake of such undermine that person's value system. The political conservatives tend to value free markets, so if concern and mitigation of global warming match their tended value, they could show more concern. If someone's value system is appealed to while a cause is being advocated for towards them, they are more likely to accept the cause. Continuing to showcase the hard evidence behind the cause would only increase the person's support once that individual's value system has already been appealed to. The hard evidence for global warming only increases the conservative once their worldview has been appealed to. Only increases the conservatives' support once their worldview has been appealed to. Mentioning free markets as solutions to global warming allows them to keep their worldview. Effective persuasion should not be dismissed if the goal is to persuade. If advertising free market solutions to global warming increases the scientific consensus acceptance among otherwise typical demographics, then those methods should be used. The goal is to prevent global warming from being an existential threat. Some studies are more effective than others, but scholarly articles hold a veracity, especially if they are logical. As Jonathan Haidt previously revealed in the essay, libertarians may be the third side of politics and the third component of moral variation. In the quote, the overall conclusion of the dissertation is that libertarianism recommends that we reduce our emissions and decrease our extraction of natural resources such as forests and fossil fuels. Furthermore, governments are permitted to undertake such quite substantial actions in order to fight the causes of climate change. End of quote. Tortman, 2016. If moral variation recommends a course of action, then the course of action may become socially obligatory. An existential threat such as climate change can call for collective coercion to mitigate it. The credibility of a source is important for predicting the future. Sociologically, institutions may be allocated more intellectual resources for the sake of granting credentials. A defended PhD thesis granted by an accredited university and then displayed on Google Scholar indicates it is an institutionally recognized source. Plus, it is logical that libertarians may sacrifice individual freedom for the sake of collective good. Without a decent society to scale libertarianism, what would be the value of their ideas? Rather intuitively, liberals do support climate change measures. In quote, climate change is a global emergency, end of quote, democratic platform. Perhaps libertarians and conservatives take climate change as a less serious issue than liberals do. Democrats are the main liberal party of the United States of America. Humans changing the climate to undo global warming may be a new development. Humans can change the climate and its temperature through engineering. Caldera 2013, the Western European value system may be at an all-time rise in its ability to be recognized. If Europe is a continent of immigrants, or at least Western Europe, then mutations could turn people into Western European stock. Western Europeans could grow in numbers due to mutations. People mutate due to environmental factors. Human action could cause the environment to cause such mutations. If the environment is engineered to become colder, then people could mutate to become of Western European stock. The likelihood of a series of mutations to receive the likeness of Western Europeans is unknown. An experiment to test the probability of such events has yet to be conducted. However, empirical evidence may point towards the probability of mass mutation. In quote, although powerful insights can be gained regarding populations, inferences drawn from the analysis of any one particular individual's data can be highly misleading. For example, an individual interpreted as being of Central European ethnicity can in fact be of mixed Northern and Southern European ethnicity. End of quote. Verema 2014. Perhaps the origin of certain ethnicities can be more directly identified as the combination of different ones. Some ethnicities may be the result of the immigration and mixtures of others. End quote. Europeans have been the focus of some of the largest studies of genetic diversity in any species to date. Recent genome-wide studies have reinforced the hypothesis that present-day European genetic diversity is strongly correlated with the geography. End of quote. Verema 2014. What has been the subject of more studies may be known more about. People are more familiar with what they have studied. Scientists are more familiar with what they have more data on and have studied more. Geography may be a great cause of ethnogenesis. If ethnic characteristics are formed due to environmental factors, then geography may determine the environments. Geography is the study of land. Articles from the government have institutional recognition. In quote, evidence from recent ovulation, scientific evolution of the human mutation rate. End quote, Harris 2015. The article is from an institutionally recognized source. Sometimes veracity cannot depend on the source's recognition by institutions. The article suggests racial characteristics exist due to mutations. If humans are generally genetically very similar and share an origin, the mutations could explain ethnic population differences. If multiple institutionally recognized articles reach the same logical conclusion, then the research results are more likely the case. In quote, origins and evolution of Europeans' genome, evidence from multiple macrosatellite loci, end of quote, Bell 2006. Many conclusions can be reached using science. Empirical evidence is experience-based. The best evidence for a theory is to reason from the fundamentals. All variation of the morality spectrum have determined an importance to end an environmental threat. Even if libertarian moral philosophy may allow for governmental restrictions to deal with negative effects of global warming. Even the libertarian moral philosophy may allow for governmental restrictions to deal with the negative effects of global warming. Global warming could potentially threaten global biodiversity. To withstand global warming, human action may be essential to lower global temperatures. Lowered global temperatures could mutate human beings into the Western European ethnicity. In the essay, the credibility of sources is determined by how logical they are. Among other criteria, another factor is reputation of the source. Perhaps the value of the Western European ethnicity, perhaps the value system of the Western European ethnicity is meant to lead to an ethnogenesis of more Western Europeans. We're excited. Okay, I hope that makes for a good documentary that I just read those.